And we are live now, and my name is Jeff Good, and I'm with iTip Ohio, and with me are the folks from Canal Winchester Local Schools. So I'm going to ask a series of questions in relation to your showcase project. And the first one I'm going to go to is Tori, and I'm going to ask the question to basically to introduce yourself and give me your project name.
Okay, I'm Tori Bagany. I teach sixth grade mathematics at Canal Winchester Middle School. Our project was a CSI crime project where the kids spent several weeks investigating a crime scene.
Wonderful. And our other teacher is Greta. So, Greta, would you take an opportunity to introduce yourself and give us a little project name?
Sure. I'm Greta Bryant. I am a sixth grade science teacher, and I call the project CSI in the Classroom.
Wonderful. Now, I'm going to stay with you now, Greta, and I want you to try to give, and I would guess it was the same for both of you, but what was your driving question?
Our driving question was, how can we use observations, inferences, and data to convict a suspect of a crime?
And Tori, that was the same for you then also?
Correct.
Great.
We did everything the same.
Great. Now I'm on Tori now, and what I'm going to ask Tori is, can you give me a breakdown of what the major steps of your project were?
Sure. What we did was we had a crime scene for our students to view. They came in the morning and it was all set up, and of course that was very exciting for them. And they spent the morning taking their data down, writing down some inferences and observations from what they gathered from the crime scene. And then from there, we interviewed our suspects. We got some more evidence and did some science experiments and some math ratio projects with them, and then they made a case based on all their data that they gathered and all the evidence that they felt was sufficient enough for our deputy officer to convict one of our suspects.
Very neat. And Greta, what were your major steps of your project?
It was basically the same thing. We had our school resource officer introduce the project to the students, and they spent quite a bit of time gathering and analyzing the evidence and interviewing the suspects, and they had to create a presentation to show Deputy Reed at the end. So they were using different pieces of technology, either Powtoons, Microsoft PowerPoint. They had to have a visual type of presentation to present.
Very neat. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about yourself and yourself and how it related to the project. So I'm still on Greta, and I'm going to stay with you. And Greta, I'm going to ask you, what would you consider the most important thing you learned in this project?
Going through this, I found that the less I tried to guide them, the better they actually did. They were thinking of things that I really didn't think of. So just, as an educator, trying to step back and trusting the students to just take control and giving them the opportunity to do that. And, of course, I was there to help them when they needed it. But I really learned that they are fully capable of, coming up with great ideas and carrying out tasks with little guidance.
Tori, what about you? What would you think some of the most important things you learned about yourself and about your students in this project?
Basically, kind of what Mrs. Bryant said, we just letting the students run with it. I mean, there were times that the students were literally running to gather evidence and to talk to our suspects because they wanted to be the first to solve it. And just to go with their thoughts and their assumptions on what they were going for, they thought of things that I never thought of. One of the things was our footprint with paint on it. They surmised that it was going to be a woman, and the footprint was too big for a woman, and because the paint was too much on the front of the footprint, because that's where all the weight was. And just the things they came up with, I had never thought in a million years that they would come up and connect those things together.
I'm going to stay with you now, Tori. If you had an opportunity, what do you wish you had spent a little more time on or done maybe a little bit differently?
We spent probably about 10 hours, I would think, on the whole project. Probably maybe a little bit more time. I think they could have gotten a little bit more in depth with their PowerPoints or their Power Tunes that they did for Mrs. Bryant's portion of the project. But I felt like it was pretty spaced appropriately. There really wasn't any downtime. The kids were working, I would say, the majority of the time, all the time on this.
And how about you, Greta? What would you say if you had a chance to do it all over again? What would you have maybe spent a little more time on or done a little differently?
Definitely, I would have liked to have spent more time creating the Powtoons, the animations. They were trying to recreate and reenact the crime scene, and there was some groups that really wanted to do the Powtoons, but because it was so new to us, it was taking too much time that they ended up doing a PowerPoint presentation, which is just fine, but they really wanted to do the animations, and we just simply didn't have enough time. So if I would have spent more time on it ahead of time as well and really learned it, I might have been able to assist the students a little bit quicker. I'm not sure if that would have helped, but I could have used more time, in that area.
And in that same vein, since I have you here, Greta, is what do you think of the part of the project you think you did? You would say gold star, absolutely the best work my students and I both did.
I was really impressed with their actual presentation and delivery of their cases at the end to Officer Reed. I'm not sure if it was just because they were so involved with the project or knowing that they were presenting their project, to a person out, from the community. I'm not sure which one motivated them the most, but they were so grown up and professional, and the way that they presented the evidence, I was very proud of them. I thought that final presentations, it exceeded my expectations.
How about you, Tori? What would you say your best part, your gold star, your students' gold star would be on the project?
I would have to agree with Mrs. Bryant. I think their attention to detail, making sure that they had a solid case. I think every group that presented their case wanted to make sure that their suspect got arrested at the end of this, and the suspects did get arrested at the end of this, which they went crazy over. Personally, I think just making sure we had all those little details down, the surveillance film that we filmed, our suspect committing the crime, just having all those little details in place to make sure that they could do their best work in figuring out who the suspect was going to be.
Well, I'm going to stay on you now, Tori, and now we're going to talk a little bit about the project. And what would you say was the most enjoyable part of the project for you?
Oh, definitely watching the kids becoming invested in this project. They really wanted to solve it correctly. They really wanted to be the group that nailed, our suspect, and to get that.
How about you, Greta? What was the most enjoyable part of the project for you?
I will be honest with you right now. A lot of our groups actually convicted the wrong person, and their faces when they found out who really did it, that was priceless to me. They were sure they had the right person, and it really led to a lot of teachable moments as well, though. And we talked about, in the real world, do you think it's possible that innocent people are found guilty? And I really enjoyed that moment where we had that deep discussion, and I don't know, it was just, not that I wanted to see them not succeed, of course, but it was just led to such great teachable moments.
Wonderful. And as you think about the most enjoyable side, and I'll stay with you, Greta, what would you say if you had to say was some of the most or the least enjoyable part, of the project?
I mean, there was a few times where, students would get a little frustrated because they really wanted to talk to one of our suspects and they weren't available. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to help guide them and get them refocused, and there was a few moments where some of the students just were really having a hard time coming to agreement with what their next step should be. I don't know if I would say it was least enjoyable, but it was definitely the most challenging part.
Mm-hmm.
And Tori, what would you say if you had to think about a least enjoyable moment of the project? What would that be?
I would have to agree with Miss Bryant in terms of the fact that I don't think there was a least enjoyable moment. They enjoyed it. We enjoyed it thoroughly. I think it was more of the management, especially when the kids wanted to be everywhere, especially those first 2 days of doing it, where they wanted to just get everything, and they were just so involved that it was kind of hard to keep track of, like, okay, this group went out in the hallway, and just keeping that management piece, I think, was the most frustrating thing. But there wasn't anything that wasn't enjoyable whatsoever doing it.
What are some things, though, that you might, if the project was done again, that you might do differently, or to make the
Hmm.
project maybe better next time?
Maybe switching the order of a couple of the activities. We showed the surveillance video before we did the height to foot ratio activity on our laptops. So the kids already had an idea of how tall the suspect was. So if I had to do this over again, I would definitely have them do that foot to height ratio analysis first, and then show them the surveillance video, so that way it would confirm what their data represented on the trend lines.
How about you, Greta? If you had to, what could you change to make the project better?
Um, there was a couple things that kind of stood out that I would like to improve on. First of all, I would like the students to have more opportunities to um, speak with the suspects. You know, if they have their interview questions written out ahead of time. I didn't do that quite so well. I kind of set them up with the suspects a little too early. I don't think the students fully had a good list of questions formed yet, and I feel like some of that time was wasted. But you know, that would be one thing. And another thing that I would want to change is I pulled the fingerprints off of the evidence for them. I think the kids would really enjoy it if they got to lift the fingerprints themselves from the different pieces of evidence that were left at the crime scene. That would be another step that we would add in there, but I think that would be more meaningful to them if they actually were the ones that lifted the fingerprints themselves.
Now, Greta, both you and Tori have talked about technology. So, talk to me a little bit about, and I've heard you talk about some of it. How did you integrate technology into your project?
There were several ways. We let them use devices, whether it was their cell phones, iPads, to take pictures of the crime scene and of all the evidence. I had students that were zooming in to the handwriting so they could really analyze how the letters were slanted and the flow of the ink. I also had, with the Powtoons, it's a website. It was a free website that our students went to, and they were able to use animation to recreate the crime scene, and it had to fit the timeline that went with their surveillance video that they were watching. So the kids had an idea of how long it took the suspect to commit this crime, and they were trying to piece together all the other evidence to see, was it possible for this person to even have done this. They used email records, the surveillance video they were able to manipulate and pause it, fast forward. They were using reference points to find out the height of the suspect. So technology was used pretty much all throughout this project.
Now, Tori, it certainly sounds like Greta's covered all of them, but what were some other? I always get you second, and you always say, "I'll just say what Greta says."
Okay, I'll say something different this time.
Awesome,
Ready?
wonderful. But what
Okay.
are some others?
In addition to what Mrs. Bryant said, we ended up using a calculator called acula.com, and the students could put in coordinates for the height to foot relationship, and it ended up graphing a trend line for them, and that ended up helping them. They also use stopwatches. They use the videos to use stopwatches to figure out the exact seconds that it took our suspect to run down the hall. Then they use this with their distance formula in terms to figure out, well, the distance from their office to the crime scene is X amount of feet, and they knew the speed of the suspect, so they were able to figure out was that enough time for them to commit this crime.
Now I'm going to put the folks in the background on task now, and I'm going to talk right now to Jennifer, who represents the curriculum side of this project. Your observations, Jennifer, about the work that the teachers did, and your observations of the project, and all of that.
I can't say enough how impressed I am with the work that both Tori and Greta and their students did for this project. I just am completely impressed at the seamless way that they integrated their standards into such an engaging, exciting projects. And I got to be a part of the project in terms of I was one of the suspects. So that allowed me to participate and see the excitement on the kids' faces as they rushed to ask me questions and where was I at this time and how did I get here and what shoes did I wear.
Please this interruption for a few afternoon announcements. We do need to see the following students in the office to pick up an item. Crew Evans and Chase Moeller.
We edit this out.
And Chris Snyder. Again, the following students need to come to the office to pick up an item. Crew Edens, Chase Moeller, and Chris Snyder. Don't forget, you have 2 opportunities to meet Neil Schusterman with
How long do we think the announcements will be?
I probably got about 2 or 3 things to say.
From the special meet and greet to the reception.
And then
The
there's
second opportunity is to fly to have lunch with him. Make sure you write our phone letter to Mr. August explaining why you want to meet him and get a tour by May 6th. Any questions, see Mrs. August. It's time to show our own B-Rock some love. Rock is going in treatment and he's reminded of how much CWMS supports them.
This is everything we do at CWMS.
Haven't forgotten the battle he's fighting. Take a picture. Your best photo showing your support of Rock to Mrs. Beck and Kate Beck at CWLS.UF by this Friday, May 1st. The best photos will be included in a video that will be shown on CWMS Live and be sent to Brooke for Rock to lift her spirits. If you need a B-Rock bracelet, your family has ordered more. You can bring your $5 to Mrs. Beth and she will get a bracelet for you when they come in.
A few kids want to say goodbye.
Anyone interested in signing up for the meeting, there will be a meeting on Thursday, tomorrow.
Sorry, Jeff.
This is longer than normal.
Of course it is.
Freshmen or 8th grade cheerleading. There will be a meeting for anyone interested in trying out for 7th grade cheerleading on Friday, May 1st, also during home base. Tryouts will begin Monday, May 4th at 3 o'clock at the middle school. And that concludes today's announcements. At this time, teachers and assistant 6th graders, in a few minutes we will dismiss our 7th and 8th graders. Thank you and have a great afternoon.
All right, now we're on John Paul. We're talking a little bit about the technology side of it and your observation about the project, and then I'll head back to our Tori and Greta and ask one final question. What's your observations, John Paul, about the technology integration?
Well, thankfully, Tori and Greta are both very, very capable technology users, so my involvement was not as extensive as it could have been had somebody not had as much experience with the technology as they did. It was great seeing the students utilizing all of the variety of devices and implementing them in the variety of ways that they were doing it. As with Jen, I was also a suspect, so I got to see a lot of the students and their use of their recording devices when they were trying to ask me questions, and when they were trying to measure and catalog, they would come down with a tablet and start asking me questions, and they would be typing stuff in. It was a great experience for them as well as myself.
I would have to say that of the two of the four, I would think that you and Jen would be. You looked a little shifty, so I think that's the reason why you were suspects.
I was actually a prime suspect to start with because there was a lot of technology that was vandalized.
Okay.
And they figured that the technology person would be the one who did it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, I'll ask one last question, and Tori, I'm going to go to you first this time. How's that? Okay. And the last question I have is, when you think about the impact of that technology integration, the technology integration side, what are some of your observations about what impact you saw with your students, and maybe even the impact that you saw on yourself as far as that tech integration?
Definitely with the students.
Here, Richard, we have an item for each office. Richard, we have an item for each office.
I'd say definitely with the students, using a stopwatch definitely help with their accuracy of the speed of our suspect, and using a trend line in 6th grade is something definitely above and beyond their capabilities in mathematics. So being able to use that website and to enter in all their data and for it to generate that trend line to help them see the scatter plot and the trend line and to figure out our suspect's foot must equate their height, I think really helps them a lot. I've done scatter plots by hand before and had students make trend lines, and that's very difficult for them to do, especially, you know, 12-year-olds. For myself, using that website, I think, for me, helped greatly and you know, my frustration, you know, when you have kids and they don't understand that two correlation aspect, you know, it just helped them see it much easier, and it was less frustration for them, so therefore it was less frustration for myself.
Greta, same question coming your way. You
Okay.
looked at the impact of that technology on that technology integration with your students and with yourself. What are some things that jump out at you?
Organization for them and myself. You know, I've done something like this in the past, but I did not use the technology like I did for this particular unit. And kids would lose things, they would misplace things. And since we put everything on Google Docs, or they had it in their school accounts, I didn't have that issue at all, and the students were so organized, and I really think that's what led to such great presentations at the end and all the details that they were able to put in, and the technology is what allowed that to happen.
Well, I got to say, I thank all of you for being here on this reflection interview, and I appreciate all the time and effort that you put into the project, and thank you, and have a great day.
Great, thank you.
you.
Thank you.